Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for doing this.
That's all right. Because of the relationship between the press, the entertainment industry, and politics, I think if you put those three things together, the tension that exists between the three was interesting to me dramatically. I had, yeah. Not with the interest of making a film about it. I was just interested as a citizen, you know, because at that time, the voice of Woodward and Bernstein was not to be heard of at all. It was all about Nixon. Nixon controlled the universe at that time politically. And when it was clear that his paranoia was going to have him, once he had all the power, he would try to use that power to dispose of anybody that would go against him, particularly if it involved the truth. And that got me because of my personal feelings about Nixon at that time, which was a man not to be trusted. But nobody else was in that place because he had the power. And so when these two guys started writing these articles, they were the only ones to do so. And I thought, wait, somebody's doing something here. And that got me focused on them. And then once that thing blew up and their articles increased to the point where they began to get attention against all other people. And the whole thing blew open in, I think, September. And then they were castigated as not having told the exact truth. I saw a profile about the two guys, and I had not, at that time they were just the byline under the articles. Now I was seeing a profile of the two guys, and that's what got me because they were so opposite in so many ways. One guy was a Democrat, the other guy was a Republican. One guy was a Jew, the other guy was a WAS. One guy came from a privileged background, the other guy didn't. They didn't care for each other. They didn't respect each other's writing, but they had to work together. I said, well, now that's interesting, you know, which of course led to why were they working together. And it wasn't about the politics of the time so much as their personal relationship, about how they had to work together, considering all their differences. They had to be approved by somebody. And at that time, I think Ben Bradlee was basically adhering to Katharine Graham, who was the main person behind the Post. And she was under threat, so he was out to protect her. And these two guys were doing stories that were going to expose a lot of things. And so Bradlee was in this really tricky spot of having to protect Katharine Graham and the Post, at the same time encourage these two guys to keep doing what they were doing. The whole thing could have exploded. So he had this balancing act to negotiate in the middle of it, and that's what led me to him. And who was this guy that had this difficult job? And that's what led to Ben Bradlee. And it took me to Ben himself. And in the beginning, he was very paranoid about Hollywood, rightly so, and distrustful and so forth, so you had to gain his trust. So I spent a lot of time, Alan and I checked into the Madison Hotel across the street, and I would spend a lot of time going to the Post and spending time with the editors who worked with and for Bradlee, but with Bradlee himself. And it took a long time for me to convince him that we were going to tell an accurate story, and we were going to try to tell the truth. He was not trusting in the beginning. And because he was such a shrewd guy, he was very tough-minded, he was very eloquent, and sort of, there was something I really liked about him. Maybe it's our Irish heritage that we share, about a bit of a fight in us, you know, about going against the odds and so forth. But anyway, I liked the guy, but he wasn't giving me anything, you know. And over time, it was about building his trust so that I could get to the real story. That's why Bradlee became such a significant character, and why I felt that the only guy to play him was Jason Robards. Well, I had a relationship with Jason that went way back many years earlier, in 1960, doing The Iceman Cometh, which had been done in Circle in the Square first, and then in 1956, and then 1960, they were going to do Sidney Lumet was going to do a TV version. And Jason was going to play the main character. And that was going to elevate Jason's profile, which he deserved. And I had a small part about a weak-minded character who betrays his mother and then in the end has to commit suicide. while we were doing it, I didn't have much to do. I had hardly any lines at all. But he was very kind to me, and nobody else really was. He just paid me some attention. I never forgot that courtesy. And so years later, when Jason's career had gone in a downward direction because of his drinking and so forth, and he had been injured in a crash, and they wouldn't hire him, I said, I want him for Bradlee. And the studio said no, and I said, well, I won't do it. You got to have Jason. So he got in, and he saw what happened. Yeah. So that was payback for me. That was a chance for me to pay back a courtesy I was given as a young actor. Yeah. Jason was very much, he embodied Eugene O'Neill. And I had been a huge fan of Eugene O'Neill. And without going too much into this, it turned out that my grandfather, who was a musician in New London, Connecticut, had been a friend of his, and I didn't know that. And that came up later in life. So there was that connection that I wasn't aware was actually a family connection. I just responded to O'Neill's work, and there was something in his work, there was a dark side to it that really, really hit me. And so when you put all this together, I felt that Jason had that in him. He had that dark side that amplified O'Neill. And so I guess the three came together. My interest in O'Neill, my fondness for Jason, Jason's having played O'Neill, that all three came together. Jason had a wonderful, strong voice. He had a gravelly, tough voice. And he could play that beautifully. And Bradlee was legitimately tough. He was legitimately tough, and he had a wonderful sense of suspicion about him, not really trusting what was coming his way and playing with it, you know. Being very tough-minded, he swore a lot. He was very profane, which took him out of the category of most people like that, you know, and put him in a whole separate category all of his own. And he was boisterous, very tough-minded, and very smart. He was very, very smart. But there was something about him that kind of enjoyed the fight, and that's what I responded to, and I felt that Jason could embody that as a performer. The other thing about Bradlee, which I responded to, was something that since that time it's become even more important and more prominent. What's the story? What Bradlee was always saying, which we had Robards repeat, was, hey, what's the story? You know, don't give me this and give me that, this little accent, that little accent. Tell me what the goddamn story is, because that's what counts. And I think, without maybe knowing it at the time, I responded to that, the value of story, so that later on in my life and my career, I placed huge importance on the value of story. So that, for example, if I'm going to do something and now it'll be broken into 3 parts. What's the story? Who are the characters that embody the story? And more importantly, where's the emotion? You know, if you can get all 3 pulled together, then you got something to work with. But for me, without story, there's nothing. And so I think that had a lot to do with Bradlee. And then Jason amplifies that in the film. You know, he just keeps saying, where's the goddamn story? It's not about politics. I don't have a lot of regard for politics per se. But the relationship between politics and journalism, I do have, because journalism is what keeps politics straight. You know, is politics telling the truth or not? You know, and very often politics doesn't tell the truth. It just tells a story that's being told by one side or the other. But it's journalism that gets to the bottom line and says, wait a minute, we're hearing this, we're hearing that, but what's the truth? You know, and I think we're into that now. The idea was I had huge respect for documentaries. It had a big impact on my life as a filmmaker, starting with Emile D'Antonio back in 1960 and A Point of Order, and then Pennybaker Leacock. And as a young actor, before I became a director, I was very impacted by the quality of You Are There. You know, you felt like you were right in the room with these people, and I really liked that. And so when it came time for me to be able to direct, I wanted to employ a documentary sensibility. So the first films I made, the first films I was capable of making were very intent on the subject of winning. And because I felt that winning was paramount in American culture, that no matter who you were, what you did, winning was more important than anything. And I had been told as a young athlete in California that it doesn't matter who wins or loses, it's how you play the game. And I found that to be a lie. That when I was in sports, I realized that winning was everything. So later on, when I got into entertainment and film, I wanted to tell that story that despite what people are saying, winning is everything. So I had this concept of taking three divisions of society, sport, politics, and education, I guess it was, and say, what if you apply the subject of winning to all those three categories? So the first was sport. We wanted to show that a guy could be literally a shit, could be a very unappealing character, but he would be totally celebrated, even accepted, even celebrated, if he could win. So I wanted to play that character. That was Downhill Racer. That he was very, very much, very unpopular, and rightly unpopular. Because he could win, he was tolerated. But at the very end, you ask yourself, what have you really won? When they lift you up, you say, what have you really won when you see that somebody right behind you is going to be the next winner and you're going to be forgotten? So how important was this? I wanted that to be a statement about the Pyrrhic victory of winning. And that then led to politics. So it was sport first and then politics. So I would play a character that valued winning at any cost. And then in the end, you would say, what have you actually won? So that my character would ask the same question at the end. It would end the movie with a question, what has been won here? And you get out right then and there. I said, this should not be about Nixon. History will take care of Nixon. If we make it about that, it will be polarized. This has to be what happened underneath all that, and it's really not about Nixon. Nixon's a historic headline maybe, but it's about these reporters that did something nobody else was doing, or very few were doing, that uncovered who he really was and what he was really doing. So it was really about them, not him. Even though I had feelings about Nixon going back to my childhood, I said, if it's about him, it won't be the story that I want to tell, because the public is going to know about him. History will take care of him. When we were preparing it, I realized that winning was very important to him at any cost. He was obviously a deeply insecure man who needed to overcome that insecurity by being something he really wasn't. So he built everything all around him. He even had henchmen like Murray Chotiner, who was later replaced by Haldeman. These henchmen around him that would elevate him and claim him to be something he wasn't. And finally it all caught up with him, and he was like a paper tiger, it's a Humpty Dumpty. I think there was a cynicism after Watergate, but there was also a cynicism before. I think there's probably going back to the turn of the last century, there's cynicism about journalism. I was interested in where Dean came into my life was, which you could title this a documentary which I would like to make next about, and you would title it "There Was a Time." There was a time when two sides worked together. And speaking of John Dean, when I was going through archival footage to do a reassessment of Watergate, which I had said no. I said, no, it's done. That's been passed. And they said, well, Discovery Channel said, would you please look hard at it? And I was looking at archival footage, and I saw this moment where the panel that was investigating John Dean about Nixon, and he was smooth as silk. He was smooth as silk and being very persuasive. And the panel was questioning him, and they were all united to try to get to the truth, but they were made up of Democrats and Republicans. There was Sam Dash, there was Sam Irwin, all these guys and they were all united. And I said, oh, so there was a time. There was a time when two sides did work together to get to the truth. That time at the moment is gone. Because it was about the truth. It was about the structure of our political system, which had to involve the truth. And the truth was under threat. And I think Bernstein knew that, from his personal background. And so I think that Carl was very much on track to say, hey, can I play a role in getting to the truth, and the truth is trying to be obfuscated by the most powerful man in the country right now. So I think Carl will always have a voice in the mix, you know. I mean, I think you can see, I don't have to say anything about that. All you have to do is look around and you see how the truth is under threat, you know, with so many people claiming the truth and so few people really entitled to make that claim. And the public is paying attention to a lot of other things than it was in those days because there are more choices out there than there were. You know, there are more channels. There were only 3 or 4 channels then for the truth to be funneled through. And now there's so many, where do you go? What do you do? And people are streaming. There's a whole lot of other stuff that makes it harder for people to find out where is the truth really. The only hope you can have when you sense, wait a minute, there's something going on here that is just not the truth. It's hyperbole, it's hyperbole, it's propaganda, it's not the truth. Where do you go? The only place you can go is you have faith that eventually the truth will out. And the people who are claiming the truth or are not truthful will self-destruct. That's the only hope you've got. Where this whole thing started was I was on a train in Florida promoting the film The Candidate. And it was the year of the 18-year-old vote, and I thought that promoting that film would draw attention to that. And I was on the back of the train, and we'd go into these places, and I would get on the back of the train, and I would have statistics about Muskie having come through, Scoop Jackson having come through, Lindsay having come through. And I said, well, so far they drew 200 people, 500 people, so it looks to me like there are thousands here today. I just want to thank you all for coming, and just I want to tell you something. I have absolutely nothing to say, and the train would pull out. That was the point that the film was trying to make. I was totally unqualified, and yet I was popular, so as a character in the film. So we were trying to make that point, and I got so depressed after a couple of stops, I thought, Jesus, I don't want to do this anymore. And I would go back and forth, and when I go back in the train, there was entertainment press and political press that were there recording this. And they were not interested in me so much. They were gossiping. And they were gossiping about the break-in at Larry O'Brien's headquarters. And I said, because this was about 2 weeks later from the actual event, and I said, hey, by the way, what happened to that? And they looked at each other, you know, they had that look. I said, what happened? Where's that? They said, it's not going anywhere. I said, what do you mean it's not going anywhere? I said, no, you don't understand. It's not going to go anywhere. That's going to go away so fast, it's never going to come out. I said, why? And they said, you really don't understand how it works. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, first of all, Nixon is going to win on a landslide. Nobody wants to be on the wrong side of this guy. He has a switchblade mentality. Nobody wants to be on the wrong side. He's going to go against the press. He's going to go against the major news organizations, and nobody wants to be on the wrong side. Secondly, public is not going to be paying any attention. They're going to be paying attention as to whether Hank Aaron breaks Babe Ruth's record. And it's going to be August, and no one's going to be paying it. And I got so upset by that, I got off the train. I did not finish the thing, and so I went back home. And I was really sad by the fact that it would never come out. And then suddenly these little byline things started to appear in the paper. And it was Woodward and Bernstein. I said, whoa, somebody's doing something, you know. And so I was primed to follow them, which I think a lot of people probably weren't. I was already primed to say, is anybody going to do something? And they were the ones. And that kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I followed it like a hawk. And then when the whole thing blew up in September, and it appeared that through some grand jury testimony they had done something wrong and it was all wrong, there was an article that was written about who these two guys were. And that's what I focused on. And it was really not so much whether they were right or wrong, about their relationship. These two guys, and they're such opposites that had to work together. And that led me to want to explore them, which led me to try to meet with them and talk to them about who they were. I guess it remains to be seen whether it's just a moment in time or whether it's going to have some weight, some carry forward weight. I just don't know. Probably had a dark side to it as well. You know, it was encouraging at the time. I was all excited. I thought, you mean I could play a role in getting more people to go into school and want to be journalists? And, gee, that's pretty exciting. You know. It was very important. I thought it was a spotlight that hadn't been shown yet. Maybe All the King's Men, maybe, you know, many years before. But I felt that for something so something so important as journalism, that there had never really been a film that exposed its value and its negative side until this. And that's why I felt this was a chance to be about to do a film about journalism, not about the President of the United States. When you boil it all down, the most important thing was his quest for the truth. And I think that's the bottom line here, is that, you know, the quest for the truth. And so therefore journalism is important because it's truth to power, you know. And I think that will always be important. And I think right now the press is the only vehicle to get truth to power. The question is, can you trust what they're telling you?